Welcome back to the channel and another episode of New Medium, Who Dis, the video series where I talk about mediums I've never tried before or mediums I haven't tried in a very long time. Today's video, we're going to talk about one of my favorite mediums to work with. The only reason I don't work with it very often, excuse me, my entire family has COVID. My mom, my dad, my kid's dad, and both my kids tested positive. I've still tested negative. So I'm a little like, yikes, every time I cough. But, anyway, so yes, watercolor is very difficult. It is definitely not what I consider my best medium or even a very easy medium. But I'm going to talk today about getting into watercolor, how I got into it, some of the tools I use to sort of help myself be better, even though I don't have, the typical class, whatever. I'm not professionally taught. So this is a lot of just me trial and error and trying to figure out what looks good, what I like doing watercolor on. So the first thing I want to talk about for watercolor, and it took me a very long time to settle on paper that I liked. Watercolor paper or drawing paper in general is, if you look, measured in pounds. So that's how much an entire ream of this paper weighs. That's where they get that number from. Watercolor paper, you want it to be as thick as possible so that it will absorb the water without buckling the paper. Apologies for the interruption. My children are doing remote learning and I have to sort of do my thing in the middle of helping them with their school. So you want your watercolor paper to be as thick as possible. I picked Artist Loft just because I do use watercolor paper for everything. The teeth of the paper, like how rough it is actually really good. It makes this paper really good for my colored pencil drawings as well, for when I need to use blending solvent. Sometimes I use baby oil, which one more time, I apologize. Oh my goodness, hopefully no more interruptions. So watercolor paper really goes well with colored pencils as well, for when I use baby oil or Gamsol or, mineral solvent, whatever, for blending. That way it doesn't soak through. So I do like to make sure that I'm staying cheap. And, there are people out there who will say that this paper is not good quality, but honestly, it works well enough for, this is a piece, right? That paper's it's not too terrible. It didn't get bowed too badly. So, that's another one of those things where if cheap is what you're looking for, then just go for it. Don't listen to what other people say. Try what works for you. And if it works for you and your purposes, then, that's okay. Like for me, my originals are going in a gallery and I'm going to start selling digital prints. So, for me, the archival quality of the paper, as long as the ink and the pencil and the paints and whatever sit on the paper properly, which they do here, it's pretty clear. I'll show you a screenshot so you can really see what it looks like. But yeah, so it just really depends on what your needs are. And definitely I would trial and error. I actually started out using Strathmore watercolor paper, 90 pound, which it's hard to explain. It would soak into the paper so much, but it would feather out and just look really bad no matter how little water I used. So I, laid off watercolors and stopped using watercolors till I picked up this Artist Loft paper. And then the other good thing about this Artist Loft paper is that this is I think a 6x8, 6x9 pad, but I also have it in the 9x12. That is, I guess for comparison, you can see that's this one versus this one. So, it's really versatile too if you want to do the postcard size like I did here. Bigger sizes, it's all just, it depends on what your needs are again, but I'm always going to say trial and error. Don't count something out until you've tried it. So obviously the place that you're going to start after you've picked your paper is going to be your brushes and your paint. And I'm going to tell you right now that expensive paints aren't always going to be better. So don't worry about not being able to, because watercolors, I have noticed the good watercolors are very expensive for what you're getting. So you can see up close. This was done using my lost the light. That was done using my Handmade Modern, that's the Target brand. You can kind of see if I open up and show you what they look like on the inside. You can kind of see how they look a little bit waxy, like almost like makeup, like a lip gloss or whatever. This set is much easier to control. What I do is 12 inches away, spray down the I use the water cup that I use is for cleaning my brushes in between colors. I don't use it to put the water. That's what the spray is for. And I'd recommend that. I wish I'd learned that. It took me several times watching Chloe Rose Art and Ray Dizzle to get that. Yeah, spray bottle is the way to activate your paint pods if you're using pods. This was the first set I started working with. You can tell that it's got, that it's been loved on. So those are a little bit more chalky. They don't mix as well, and they come out a little more see-through. They're transparent. They're not as opaque as these ones are going to come out. I really want to get into being able to use liquid watercolor paints better. I was going to do Pennywise in watercolor, but Georgie popped out so well in colored pencil, I just decided to change and do that in pencil instead. But I'm definitely I'm looking at the possibility of doing a like a psychedelic series of mushrooms and fairies, but we'll see. I want to be able to use liquid watercolor. So instead of coming in a pod, it comes in a tube, right? That looks really just like um, an acrylic or a shit, an acrylic or a an oil paint. It's just activated with. Oh wow, that's not even. That is a solid chunk of paint that came out of this. That's the thing about watercolor, liquid watercolor also, is that it dries out very easily. You can reactivate it easily if you have a palette you can stick it on. Even if it dries out, you just spray it down like I said, like I showed before with the spray bottle, and that will reactivate the color. It's just a little aggravating to have to deal with that in the meantime, especially since I didn't have a palette immediately available. The other thing I like about watercolor is that it will go down your drain. Acrylics, do not put acrylic paint in your drain. The way that I do it is another interruption. Yay, remote learning. So yes, do not put acrylic paints in your drain. I was saying, so what I do is I do it in the kitchen sink when I have to scrub out the bottom of my water cup, because I'm switching from watercolors to acrylic and back again. So what I do is I put the drain thing, like if you have the thing that catches stuff before it goes down the drain, and then clean it out and catch all the acrylic pieces and then just throw that in the trash. But yeah, acrylic paint will stick to the insides of your pipes, and it doesn't, like, it won't snake out because it needs like turpentine or some kind of solvent to break it down because it's plastic. So and I'll do a video on acrylic, you know, at a later date, because I am a little bit more familiar with acrylic than most other mediums. Yeah, just make sure that watercolors are the only paints that you're putting down your drain, because those will dissolve. They're meant to dissolve in water, whereas acrylic is meant to stand up under the elements. So then once you've got your paints and your paper picked, then your next choice is going to be your brushes. Keep in mind, this is just my suggestion. This is not me saying you have to do it this way, or that it won't be good if you do it this way. This is just sometimes I will use different brushes, but for the most part I don't use my flat brushes. Those are I've reserved specifically for acrylics, just because I hate having to clean brushes, and you have to use solvent to clean a brush that's been used with acrylic if you're going to use it with a different kind of paint. I mean, technically you should be cleaning your brushes every time anyway, completely, just to keep them from breaking down. But if you can't, then yeah, it's just best to have a watercolor set and an acrylic set. So some of these I've used with acrylics, some of them, most of them have only ever been used in watercolor. So I have three different kinds of brushes. These are my favorite brushes. These ones here. I really like triangle shapes. You can see I have triangle shaped pencils. My graphite is all triangle shaped. So these are all triangle shaped. This is the kind of brush that I like. They have varying widths, but these not the flat kind. By the flat kind, this is what I mean. This is the brush I use for my charcoal blending, but that's what I mean by a flat brush, whereas these ones are rounded. These ones are the ones that are the best for watercolor. Sometimes I'll use a flat brush if I've got like lines or details I need to use, but I will get into instead of using flat brushes for those details, what I'll do is I have 2 sets of watercolor pencils. This one is a set that I got, just a cheap set. I didn't even know they were watercolor pencils until it was a set I got from an ex-boyfriend, and he was like, "Oh yeah, those are watercolor pencils. Do you know how to use those?" And I was like, no, I don't. But I got really into using watercolor pencils as colored pencils until I discovered that you don't need detail brushes if you use watercolor pencils, because then you just this is my Prismacolor set of watercolor pencils, 12 basic colors. These are all analogous to the colors that come in the regular set. So for instance, we have carmine red, and then this is the carmine red watercolor pencil, and then this is the carmine red regular color pencil. I don't know if the light's too bright or if you can see that, but you can see that the pigment is pretty much the same. The difference is going to be the binder. Water breaks down the watercolor pencil. Blending solvent breaks down the wax in the Prismacolor pencils. So that's the difference there, but the pigment should be exactly the same. And then you can and what I do when I do those details is these brushes absolutely revolutionize the way that I paint with watercolors. They are brilliant. I did a set of watercolor Mjolnir. Thor's hammer is something that I like to do drawings of and whatever, to practice shading, that kind of thing. So I got these. These are the Arteza brand, Arteza, I don't know. I've heard literally 17,000 different pronunciations. This set, they're not like pens like some of the sets are, and it comes off backwards. It screws off backwards because they come from China. So you can see that's just a tube there that you fill up with water, and then you put that back on, and you've got your. And then when you squeeze the pen, the chamber fills up and it just barely wets. Like, I didn't even need to squeeze it. All I did was hang it upside down. And you can see that it got wet. I don't know if you can see that. But yeah, so that is a good way to go in and activate the color over the details without just, you don't have to worry about slopping a whole bunch of water down and not being able to control it. So those are absolutely 100% one of my go-tos when I'm doing watercolor. And that was something that I did not get the importance of those kinds of brushes until I watched, I think it was Chloe Rose. Somebody I follow on YouTube did a video about the brush pens and was like, yeah, this is actually kind of freaking cool. So that is why I started using them, but they are invaluable. They are absolutely amazing. The other brand of brush that I use is, I use Brea Reese and then Delta. Okay, because you see how they have such a beautiful like tip on those brushes. Absolutely. And I can hold them and get a lot of good coverage without the streakiness. And yeah, so I really like these three brands that I've picked. Of paintbrushes. When I talk about acrylics in my acrylic video, I'll go over some of the other kinds of brushes that I have. I have sponge brushes. I have a palette knife. If by palette knife you mean plastic piece of crap that doesn't really function the way a palette knife should. But and then I also use, as I mentioned, some of my brushes for blending my charcoal projects. So that's a lot of different and interesting uses for paintbrushes. If, you want to dabble in watercolor but aren't sure, that's exactly, kind of what I did was, I'm not sure, but I have all these paintbrushes anyway. If I can find cheap paints, then I might as well try it out. And honestly, in a previous iteration of this video, because I've been having issues with the sound, I mentioned Jazza Brooks and how he always is like, well, I've never used this medium before and I'm scared of this medium and I'm gonna suck with this medium, and then he ends up doing these amazing things. And I have to tell you, as I'm learning, I'm discovering, and it's amazing that experiencing this firsthand, watching, people like Jazza and Ray Dizzle and, and all those people going through it, like, if you there's, certain basics, life drawing, figure drawing, I put those in the same category. So life and figure drawing, color theory, which includes, shading and how shading works and 3 dimensions, and composition. If you are able to understand how the medium that you're working in can be complemented by the composition of the piece, then you are well on your way to being able to use watercolor. One of the things that I noticed is I would never do this style in watercolor. This sort of like, most of my paintings are bold, acrylic paintings are these bold people, cartoons, like illustration type paintings. Whereas my watercolors, that's where I'm doing the flowers and the landscapes and all that. And I think that I'm really digging that. I really like doing my acrylic work on canvas. I really like doing this watercolor work on paper. And either way, it's going to make for good digital downloads, good prints in my new shop, which I'm also going to be doing a video about as soon as I get it open. I'm struggling now with whether or not I want to use my phone as a scanner. I think they're okay quality, but that stands to a little more scrutiny. I'm waiting on some friends to give me some feedback, some advice maybe. So that is all going to be coming up in future videos. I have my next episode of the horror. I have the topic picked out. So if you are a horror fan and interested in some of the things I have to say about the genre, then definitely click subscribe, like this video, share with your friends, anybody who is learning about watercolor, learning about art in general, just anybody who needs a little bit of encouragement. Because if anybody, if I can be, if I can produce this, being self-taught after 3, almost 4 years now, then I feel like anybody can do it. It's just a matter of diligence and practice. So that being said, I appreciate you guys joining me for another episode of New Medium Who Dis, and I will see you guys in the next video.